So today, I want to appreciate everyone taking the time for the hour to spend with us. We're going to look at AWS and best practices for commercial optimization. The intention of today's chat is to enable you to go out of this session and understand how you can look at your AWS bill and what mechanisms that you can use to potentially lower that bill or to optimize it. So running through who's going to be speaking today. My name's John James. I'm one of the account managers here based in Sydney. I look after Australia and New Zealand, so potentially good afternoon to everyone that's on from the other side. Good morning to those of you here in Australia. Joining me today, as I mentioned on the live chat, is my colleague Amy Romano. So if anytime you have questions, so some of the information will be going through at a 200, 300 level. Anything, just send it right through, and Amy will reply back to you as quickly as she can to make sure that you get the most out of today's content. Also running through today's webinar with me are two customers that were really gracious to volunteer their time and run through their customer stories in regards to how they've approached cost optimization. So the first person that's going to be speaking with me is going to be Katerina, and she's joining us from REA Group. She has helped build within REA Group what they call a FinOps practice. So she's going to give us some oversight and a viewpoint on how her organization, from a business perspective, has approached commercial optimization for the AWS platform. Also joining us is another great person, Angela from Technology One. Angela is their SaaS optimization lead, and she's going to run through some tools and mechanisms they've built internally and how they visualize and make decisions on their AWS utilization and how they can make decisions to help optimize their environment. Structurally, how we'll go is I'll go for about 20 minutes, and then I want to hand over the floor to both Kat and Angela so that they can share these awesome stories. So jumping in today's content, commercial optimization and savings potential. Why should you look at it? Well, as an example of what we've seen customers starting to adopt the AWS platform, they typically come in at what we call as a base price, so a base utilization of what they might have had on-prem. Going through what we'll look at as a journey today, you can look at cost optimizing through a number of different mechanisms, including right-sizing, making reservations, and taking advantage of price cuts on the AWS platform. One of the KPIs or goals of the AWS team is to make sure that you're utilizing the services as efficiently as possible, and we really like to help you save money on your bill. So just an example, this is what we've potentially seen customers save coming onto the platform and going through the different steps, moving from potentially a base 100% down to a 25% of what they originally had. So these mechanisms are really good to take internally into your organization. Hopefully Kat and Angela will give us some success stories on how they've seen savings of their own. When we look at cost optimization, what I want to jump through today is what I call the 5 different pillars of cost optimization. So you can think of these pillars as either independent pieces of work, or in the examples that we're going to provide today, potentially you run them all concurrently through a center of excellence. The first pillar when you want to look at cost optimization is right-sizing. I'm just going to mention these briefly, and then I will jump into all of them at a more deep dive level after I've given you the overview of what the pillars are. So right-sizing the individual instances that you're using, increasing the elasticity of the AWS services on the platform, so making sure you're turning things on and off or auto-scaling, picking the right pricing model. So we have the 3 different pricing models within AWS, OnDemand, Reserved, and Spot. How do you understand and utilize the right pricing model that's going to have the best pricing structure for the use case that you're looking at? The last one in regards to services is looking at your storage class and your storage utilization. So how can you look at S3 or EBS and potentially maximize your savings on those 2 different storage classes? And then wrapping that all together, similar to how Kat and Angela have done, is creating governance and measures in regards to cost optimization. So this is organizationally, what is the best practice and how you look from a business unit or from an organization strategy at your AWS environment and creating governance and measures for the different targets that you have. So jumping into the first part of cost optimization. So this is the area where typically customers look at as the first thing that they can pursue to cost optimize their environment. So one of the benefits of AWS is the elasticity that it provides you and how you can easily procure and manage resources. With the AWS platform, you can turn on EC2 or database services and have them running 5-10 minutes, depending on the workload that you're firing up. What that elasticity also supports is the ability to change workloads that are currently running. So if you have a particular machine that has low utilization of, in this case, RAM or memory, potentially you could resize that machine into a smaller instance and has cost savings. I'll give an example of that in just a second. But what I look at, or what I would recommend to customers, is utilize a tool and track these measurements or metrics over time. So you can look at CloudWatch to measure the RAM, CPU metrics that I mentioned, but also you can look at third-party tools. So whatever is going to give you that data and that visibility historically, make sure that you're provisioning and you're managing your resources appropriately. An example of that is depicted right here in this slide. So in this case, we have an M4 4x large, and on the bottom left, you can see that the utilization in the first column, or the first line, is about 10 to 20%. What you could look at doing in this scenario is migrating or transitioning that M4 4x large into an M4 large instance. In this case, in this example, that would result in an 87% savings for that particular machine. So we encourage you to look at those cost options and always match them up. The second example or pillar when it comes to cost optimization is making sure that you're utilizing the elasticity of the AWS environment. So the same thing with right sizing. AWS resources can be reassigned, they can be turned off and turned on demand. Utilize that to your benefit. So turning off dev and test environments, or non-production instances in this case, is one of the greatest mechanisms we can see. Just looking at your environment today, think of instances that you don't need running 24/7 and potentially schedule that. There's tools that you can utilize to schedule it. There's some links down here at the bottom, and these slides will be made available for everyone after this webinar. You can utilize some of the native services within the AWS platform to schedule instances on and off. Excellent way to cost optimize your environment and to help make sure that you're not utilizing services when they're not needed. Going hand in hand with turning things off is potentially look at re-architecting your applications to take advantage of auto scaling. So this really falls in line with the principle of right sizing. Instead of vertically scaling your infrastructure, adding more memory and adding more CPU to a particular instance in order to manage the capacity that a workload needs, potentially look at scaling that workload or that environment horizontally. Horizontally managing these workloads will then allow you to scale them up and then scale them back down based on demand or usage, and then you have a footprint that's more aligned with what you need at a given time within your environment. So on top of the right sizing, increasing the elasticity of your environment is a great way to cost optimize. The third pillar that we look at in regards to optimization is leveraging the right pricing model. So this one is an area, if I'm looking at the prescriptive approaches, potentially you're looking at cost optimize, or I'm sorry, right sizing your instances, making sure that you're utilizing all the resources as much as you can. And then on the next approach, potentially making reservations on the on-demand instances that you have running a majority of the time. So what a reserved instance is essentially it's a committed contract. So these contracts are offered on 1 or 3-year terms, and they offer a percentage discount for the commitment to a particular instance or machine. Reserved instances are offered for a number of different services. So this includes Amazon EC2, we cover RDS, Redshift, and Elasticity. There's also some commitments discounts that you can get to DynamoDB and CloudFront. I would highly encourage, if you're running those services, looking at reservations in some form to help cost optimize that model. Just diving in a little bit into the reserved instances and how they work on a commitment basis. So essentially with the reserved instance, you're committing to a particular instance or instance family and size on a 1 or a 3-year basis, as I mentioned. There's also 2 different types of reserved instances that you can take advantage of. You can take advantage of standard or convertible. Based on whether you're choosing standard or convertible or 1 or 3 year, that will dictate and influence the level of savings and the level of commitment. And I'll run into those in just a minute. Within the standard reserved instances, so in this case, I'm looking at a 1-year commitment, you have some flexibility into how you're deploying and how you're managing your resources under this commitment. So you could deploy them in a regional fashion. And essentially, this is what you're saying here is you're looking at making reservations on instances within a particular region, and you're getting a discount for that commitment. The alternative is availability zone specific. So this is a great mechanism if you want to reserve capacity within a particular region, or a particular availability zone, I'm sorry. If you have the case where you want to make sure for your auto-scaling environment or for your production workload that particular instances are going to be readily available, this might be a great mechanism that you could take advantage of to get discount and then to make sure that capacity is available within that particular availability zone. I'm going to drive into the differences between standard and convertible in a minute, but the convertibles are offered on a 3-year term, and they give you the flexibility to change things within your commitment. So if you're looking at making a commitment for a 3-year period, however you want to change your instance family, the type, the size, operating system of the reserved instance that you have, potentially you can look at taking advantage of convertibles. Same thing when it comes back to the standards, they're still tied to a regional or availability zone specific. However, you have that option and flexibility to change things. The standards are also offered on a 3-year term, so 1 or 3 years based on the requirements that you have. One of the components of reserved instances, and this comes into how you're looking at managing capacity and potentially how you're paying for it, is the payment structure for reserved instances. So we allow customers to commit to the platform, either standard, convertible. You can commit on a no upfront fashion. So if you're understanding and know that you're going to utilize resources for a given amount of time, so a good example of this would be potentially for a production workload, maybe a back-end production database, something where you're confident that it's not going to be changing, you potentially could do that commitment. You could do it in the no upfront fashion, where you're making no CapEx commitment, or you can also look at adding CapEx components to the reserved instance in either a partial or an all upfront fashion. So if you're interested in potentially paying for instances all upfront, you can use that mechanism or potentially using partial. The items that are shaded on this slide, so the standard, convertible, 1 year and 3 year, and then the payment structures in regards to no upfront, partial, and all upfront, these are the items that influence the discount and the price of the reserved instance. So typically how we see is the longer commitments and the more upfront, more percentage savings. This can seem a little interesting in how do you approach this? How do you start to make recommendations? How do I look at my environment and determine what's the best fit for me? Kat and Angela are going to drive in pretty good examples on how they've done this today and how they've managed this. Another one of the things that you can look at is utilizing the AWS account management team. We can provide you information on what's running in your environment and help you with recommendations on what we think would be optimal reservations. So definitely reach out to us if you're looking for that kind of help. On the reserved instance front, one of the things that we've introduced recently over the last year is flexibility into how you manage the commitments that you have under reserved instances. So with regional RIs, if you're running in a Linux or Unix environment, you have the ability to change instance sizes within a particular family. So this is applicable to people who are running those types of workloads. The example here is M4X large. The discount can be prorated and isn't applicable if you were to change to M4 2X larges. So you can keep those things in mind when you're looking at the commitment that you have to a particular instance. If it's in Linux or Unix, you have the ability and the flexibility to change the size. So great for people who are running those environments. Diving a little deeper into the convertible reserved instances. With the convertible reserved instance, you're essentially managing or looking at reserving a specific capacity, but you have the ability to change it. And these are the criteria that you can change. So you can change instance families, instance sizes, operating systems, and tenancy. So again, a great cost savings mechanism if you have commitment to the platform. However, you potentially maybe down the road a year or 18 months, you're looking at changing some of the configurations within your environment. If you're looking at the convertible reserved instances, essentially what you're committing to is the time period, the region, and AWS, and then the spend. So within the AWS convertible reserved instances, you have to spend greater or equal to what your convertible instance requirement is. So it's a good mechanism that you can change them at any given time. So I've ran through the on-demand options and the convertible options. Sorry, the reserved instance options. There is also a third pricing option that you can take advantage of for specific workloads that would be applicable, and that's take advantage of Spot. So Spot allows you essentially to bid on compute resources. You have the capacity to look at and bid on unused capacity within the AWS fleet. And one of the advantages of that is you don't pay for more than your bid. This is a great pricing structure for workloads that are running, for example, in batch, or you need to put large amounts of compute at a specific task for a small amount of time. Think of this as potentially a good cost savings mechanism to run those particular workloads. Typically what we see is the spot price is around 1/10 of the on-demand price for EC2. So it can be a great model to run those workloads at a in a cost-effective way. When you're looking at the 3 different pricing options that we have, also look into your portfolio around striking a balance between them. So what many customers do is they'll look at using specific pricing models for specific use cases. Potentially you're running your Elastic workloads that we mentioned before. You're running those on demand. Production workloads that are on 24/7, it's more of a static environment. You can look at running reserved instances. And then as I've mentioned, on the workloads that are either going to be batch or it's a given time frame during the month, potentially utilize Spot. So you can effectively manage and find a balance between these 3 to have the most cost optimized footprint on the environment. The next area that you want to look at after you've looked at your right sizing, your elasticity for your environment, the pricing structure, is take a look at your storage. So sometimes you can be provisioning storage and not necessarily utilizing all of the storage that you're taking advantage of that you have provisioned. And this is a great area to revisit and re-examine every once in a while and see if you can remap capacity in a more cost-effective pattern. So I'm going to quickly drop into block storage and object level storage and what you can do with those 2 different services. So with block storage, or EBS, I'd advise customers to take a look at what they've provisioned, and if what they've provisioned can be changed or altered for cost optimization. So example, switching between solid state disks or hard drive disks. Switch around the configuration based on your requirements and based on the use case that you have. And what that will enable you to do is manage the cost footprint that you have for those EBS volumes. What you can also do is look at resizing them. So if you have portions of disks that are underutilized, look at resizing that disk and potentially making it smaller. The third option is look at disks that are potentially inactive. So there's tools within the AWS platform that can help with this, one of them being Trusted Advisor. Take advantage of Trusted Advisor and see if you have inactive storage allocated, and potentially make a snapshot of that storage and then turn it off for the time being until it needs to be utilized again. On the S3 approach for optimization, one of the best practices we can say is look at life cycling the objects that you're containing within S3. So typically customers are going to be utilizing standard S3 for their object level storage. There's other different flavors of S3 that are available that can potentially be better for your given use case. So look at potentially warm, standard, infrequent access S3 or Glacier. These different storage classes within S3 have different requirements built around them for retrieval, for data retention. So manage those in the best way that you can in a cost-optimized footprint. A lot of times, potentially, this is taking log information or just backups, and instead of saving them in standard, save them in Glacier. You'll have potentially significant savings by moving these resources from hot to a more cold retrieval policy area. The last area of cost optimization that I want to drive in before I give the floor to Angela and Kat is looking at governance and measures in regards to cost optimization. This goes in a lot into what they've done today to manage their AWS footprints. The first thing that we encourage customers to look at in regards to governance and measures is tagging resources that have been deployed or allocated within the environment. Tagging allows you to cost allocate particular services to whatever tag. So if that tag could potentially be associated with an environment, it could be associated with an application, potentially a business center or a cost unit. This visibility allows you to track the utilization and cost of those particular business units or however you're using your tagging mechanisms or schema. What that does is it allows you to manage at a more granular level the cost from month to month or historically for that particular application, that particular user business unit. Having this visibility into the cost allows you to make more strategic decisions on what you want to utilize, provision, anything that's applicable to your organization. Having those tags then allows you and also sets you up for success in regards to creating metrics or targets for optimization. So you can create targets within your organization to say, all right, we want to turn off this many instances daily, or we want to have this much of our fleet always covered under our reserved instances. These are just examples, but things that you could take advantage of potentially within your organization. With those measures and with that tagging, then you can also start to create more value-based metrics. So potential, what is your unit cost for a customer? What is your cost per developer in regards to developing software? If you're tagging all of your resources that are assigned to developers, then you can look at that individual cost and break that out. Just the last slide before I hand over to Kat is how do we encompass and wrap this together? So these are some of the things that you'll need or that I would recommend in regards to the mechanisms or the things you would want to look at for success. On the optimization or the reserved instance front, leadership support is really important. Have that support where they're having those focused metrics and goals to set optimization targets. Kat and Angela are going to really drive into the Cloud Center of Excellence. Potentially look at setting that up in your organization because that's going to feed into these goals and tools that you're allocating or enabling. You can look at engagement from your business stakeholders. That's always beneficial in getting these projects done. And then all these other areas below. So the measures and the targets that we've mentioned, you can take advantage of the AWS native tools for reporting, tagging enforcement, governance controls, and then of course continuously looking at ongoing education. So looking at new pricing structures that potentially come up. You can follow AWS blogs. Attending the webinar today is a great example. Just continuously be on top of that education and looking at the cost optimization trends. So with that, that was the best practice or the areas that I would say to explore in regards to cost optimization. Now I want to hand over to Katerina from REA Group, and she's going to give us that practical experience from a customer perspective on how organizationally she's managed the cost optimization and cost allocation for REA Group.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. My name's Katerina, and I work for REA Group. Most of you will probably know it for our Australian portal, realestate.com.au. However, as part of the family, we also have My Fund in China, iProperty in Asia, which owns several leading property portals, and Share of Move USA and PropTiger in India. I don't have a technical background. My background is in finance accounting, and I'm a commercial manager looking after IT in REA. However, I work very closely with our ops teams and the wider IT community, so we have now been calling it FinOps, which is the extension of DevOps that I'm sure you're all familiar with, and we'll unpack that a little bit later on. I first became very familiar with AWS when we did our budget for 2017, and we asked all of our teams in all of our business how much requirement they have for AWS for the upcoming year, and the collective answer was that we needed an increase of 50%. And this wasn't of a small base either. And this was something that we simply couldn't afford within our budget allocation, and we had some tough decisions that might have had to be made. We could either stop some projects, reallocate resources from other priorities just to pay for our AWS bill, or the other option was to try and see and reduce our forecast, and that's what we chose to do. So at this stage, we were already buying reserved instances, and we had a pretty good utilization rates. And as a finance person, RIs are something I would always find money for. To me, it's like your electricity company or your landlord offering 50% discount. You know you're going to use it, and as long as your utilization is high, why not take the savings? It's a no-brainer. But even though we were buying our RIs and we were already saving, it wasn't enough, and we still had a problem. So we began to dig deeper to find out what we can do about it. We analyzed the problem and realized we actually don't have much visibility of our costs. The way our accounts are set up is that a large chunk of our costs sat in a shared account and was not tagged, which meant that we couldn't see who was using it, why, and what we could do about it. It also meant that we couldn't forecast accurately and always looked at the costs in hindsight, with sometimes surprising bills. Another challenge was that, as I'm sure you all know, AWS has quite a complex domain. Just have a look at the bill. It's hundreds of lines long. And trying to think how we would go about cost optimization, there were so many implications. What comes first? Do we buy RIs? But then if we right size and no longer need these RIs, do we stick with OnDemand? How about Spot? Apparently you can save 90% by using Spot. Do we have auto scaling? Are we turning things off at night? What is our current utilization? But then apparently clustering would work best. As you can see, it was tough to know where to start. So furthermore, our company structure didn't help. The way our business is structured is that each business unit, such as residential, commercial, or media, have their own P&L, which means they have their own revenue and expense budgets, and they're accountable for it. And that's fantastic, except that the AWS budget set with central IT. The whole business unit used AWS and spent it, and we were left picking up the bill. Each of the business units' priority is to deliver new products, new features, and enhancements. AWS Costs was the least of their problems, and right at the bottom of their priority list. it was very hard for us to get traction, and we were not any closer to solving our issue. So what was the answer to our question? We decided to get started with a hack day project. So in REA, quarterly we have these hack days, or what we now call inventorship days, where we have 3 days to work on whatever project we like. You stand up in front of all your peers, you pitch an idea, and people that are interested in your project will come and join. And at the end of those 3 days, we have a marketplace where you showcase what you've done. So as part of this hack day, we were able to build a team and build a dashboard that showed spend by each team, and more importantly, it showed wastage by each team. And by wastage, I mean the difference between what the teams were actually spending to what they would be spending if they take all the RI recommendations that we give them. As part of that dashboard, it also showed some of the metrics that John spoke about before, such as percentage of instances that are being turned off and percentage of instances right-sized, as well as the recommendations. However, our dashboard was only as good as the data that was in it. And most instances were still not tagged and were sitting in the shared unallocated bucket. But it did highlight that we have a problem, and the rest of the business could see it. By highlighting this problem, it allowed us to put a business case together to get some help, so we didn't have to do it alone. And we got some consultants to help us build a solution. So solution number 1 was, first of all, we needed to tag our cloud so that we would have visibility of what we were doing. And this one was called Enforce-o-tron. And basically what it would do is it would shut down any instance that wasn't tagged in our shared accounts. We gave our teams plenty of notice and warning, asking everyone to tag their instances in the shared accounts, letting them know that come go live date, everything untagged will be terminated. We provided people with support and helped them to do that. Now, I'm not going to lie, when on the day that we were going live, we were a bit nervous. But amazingly, come day 1, guess how many instances Enforce-o-tron killed? 0. Everything was tagged. So that was quite remarkable. And going forward, if someone was spinning up an instance in a shared account without a tag, the Enforce-o-tron would kill it. So the second technical solution is we provided each team with regular reporting of their actual costs against budget, and also I would work with the team to work out a forecast showing what would happen if they continue spending at the current rate. This was really important as it highlighted the problem early and showed the team that if you continue doing what you're doing now, you will blow your budget by 100,000. It allowed them to act on it. So as a result of these fantastic technical solutions that the team have built, we were able to tag all of our instances, which meant that our shared unallocated bucket was minimized, with majority of costs allocated to one of the business units. This also provided much greater visibility about what we were using, where, and why. We were able to question many instances, killing over 200 of them with 0 impact and that no one missed. I really thought that was remarkable. Perhaps most importantly, this allowed us to decentralize AWS budget with the buy-in from the leadership team, of course, and the stakeholders. From the previous state where the budget was held centrally with IT, we had huge growth problem that we couldn't afford and we couldn't do much about it. We were able to divvy up this huge problem into 15 much smaller, more manageable problems all across the business. The key difference here, of course, is that now the problem sat with the people who had direct power and extra motivation to do something about it. The accountability and responsibility now set with those who used it. So a long time ago, we adopted a DevOps principle of you build it, you run it from Burner. However, now we've added one more principle. You build it, you run it, you pay for it. And now what that means is if you're building something, not only you're encouraged to build it of great quality so that it doesn't wake you up in the middle of the night if it breaks, you're also encouraged to do it in a cost-efficient way so that it doesn't become a problem for you further down the line. So what was the outcome of our project? So first of all, what we saw was a change in behavior. All of a sudden, people were talking about AWS costs and people were caring about how much things were costing. I remember seeing blog posts saying that people have done audits on their AWS accounts and have found that if they right-size a couple of instances and shut some things off, they could save $70,000 in the next 12 months. It was really quite incredible. And so this was our initial outlook back when we did the budget with the 50% growth that we've got coming out. And as a result of the change in behaviors and all the work that we've done, this is what it looked like towards the end. So as you can see, instead of a big blue shape with us not really knowing what's going on within our accounts, now we can see that spend divided by each line of business, also with the forecast of what it's going to look like for the full year. But most importantly, there's that great big space between the blue dotted line and the next line, and all of that represents savings. And so we were able to achieve that and to stay within our budget envelope with the minimal business impact. We didn't have to derail roadmaps or reassign people. We didn't have to stop projects or do any of that. It was big rocks, low-hanging fruit that we were able to implement as part of our current existing roadmaps. And so savings can buy you a lot of dumplings. And it's funny, but the point of the slide is just to demonstrate it's important to celebrate your successes and to recognize the people that have done all the good work. Thank you.
Thanks, Kat. I think it's a great story of how organizationally creating visibility into your costs and then assigning ownership to the individual teams. Thank you very much for sharing that. Coming up next is Angela. So Angela's going to share with us her experiences at Technology One. A little bit different of approach to cost optimization, where Kat was discussing organizationally how they've done it. Angela, your story is a little bit more on the technical front and how you've adopted some technical tools internally. So really interested to hear your journey and how you've gone through your AWS cost optimization.
Thanks, John. So briefly, just wanted to really quickly go over what our organisation does. We have over 1,000+ high-profile companies, leading corporations, government departments, and statutory authorities as our customers. So Tech One is one of only very few global enterprise vendors. We have a suite of 14 products, and this gives us and our customers an experience of a very powerful and integrated enterprise solution. So, our journey to the cloud. Our journey started about 5 years ago. We were constantly growing as a company. In fact, we actually double in size nearly every 3 years. And because of this, our cloud costs grow and become more expensive and more complex. So because of this complexity, we actually found ourselves wanting to ask some really relevant and really simple questions. Some of the things that we were trying to understand was how much we were spending on what Amazon services. We also wanted to be able to discover things such as what's changed. AWS Cost Explorer was a really great start for us. It provided an established overview of our daily and our monthly costs. And from that, we were able to get a really good operational point of view, and it covered what we needed. But from a management point of view, we just needed to dive a little bit further into our analytics. and link it back to our business KPIs. So in the beginning, we tried some standard marketplace solutions. They were really great. They gave us a really good starting point, but it probably lasted about 6 months. After that, we actually outgrew them, and we outgrew them really quickly. We then decided to try our own thing and just see what would happen as AWS within Australia grew. And so we waited about a year, and we decided that we would try another SaaS provider. But again, we just continually found that it was actually us as a company that were providing them with fantastic growth opportunities, and we were constantly asking them to push the boundaries to deliver what we needed as a business. We just really felt constantly that we were needing more information, and they couldn't provide it to us in a really timely manner. So in the end, we decided to invest in our own knowledge. We knew what we wanted from our billing details. We knew it was all in there, and we just had to figure out a way to try to farm it. And so that's what we did. It started with some really simple KPIs, such as using data as evidence for our exec team. They're doing something versus doing nothing. How much coverage do we actually have currently across all of our consolidated billing accounts? How much coverage do we have per account? We knew that we could get all this information really easily and just provide a really quick snapshot for our exec team on what that looked like. But we actually knew that we could get more info. We could dive deeper into it and get some better analytics. So we did do that. We developed different dashboards that would be able to break it down by region, by account, by platform, and we could do this all in one view. By looking at the one view, we could really easily and clearly see what we were doing that was really great and also what wasn't so great. We were able to focus on improving whilst keeping an eye on what was just working. We could see what we had with great coverage and what didn't, and we could see the errors that were made and not cleaned up. We were able to see the impact of our business decisions and follow them through. So in our company, we have a saying that the 1% matters. And the 1% in our case is really important. And I'm going to share with you a story on how just by looking at that 1%, we were able to save $12,000. So this is where this tool comes into its own. We were able to go down to a really granular level, and we were able to find what our costs were at an hourly basis. And as you can see here, I've highlighted one particular instance type we use. And you can see that we have really great coverage. 97.5% of our instances are covered using an RI. But the alarming thing in this particular instance here is the 2.5% that isn't. And that is always going to pique my interest really closely. So by looking at the hourly level per day, I could see the same thing that was happening at 2 a.m. every single day. I knew what it was, and what's worse is it came up red, which for us meant that it was on demand. So intuitively, I knew what the process was. It had been something that we had built and implemented years ago, a process that we still needed and used every day. We had concentrated on improving the application that ran on this instance, but not the actual EC2 instance that runs them all. As we know, AWS charged by the hour. Our instances were staying on until around 2:20 in the morning each day, and then they would terminate. And at around 2:40 a.m., within the same hour, they would rebuild. So what that meant for us is, within that first 20 minutes of our 2 o'clock time range, it actually meant that the RI was already being allocated to that particular instance. And then when they would be terminated and built back up, It was an on-demand cost that was being allocated straight away. And what that actually meant was, by doing this, it was actually costing us $12,000 per month. And by looking at it at this level, we're able to just change one of our processes. And if we hadn't have done that, we would never have been able to see this. It's a gradual change that we've had to test and test and test by all of our developers. And by using this tool, we're able to watch the change in process over time. We're still working on it, but you can already see that that red area in the graph is continuing to decrease. And over time and over the course of the year, we've been able to save $100,000. And we've been able to watch and follow this business decision the whole way through. So what's ahead for us and our tool that we've developed? So we're constantly asking new questions. We've learned that the key benefit of investing in our own capabilities means that we're no longer restricted to accepting a rigid set of graphs and reports. We can continue to ask, well, what about this? Or what about that? And how does that work? And why is it doing that? And this gives us endless possibilities on how to continue to optimize our management of our AWS products and services. So at the moment, this only looks at our EC2, but we will be looking at different types of services, our RDS, our Lambda functions, our whatever it is that we can do, that's where we'll continue to move. And so we've been able to, we're moving from a descriptive to actionable analytics. It's real-time monitoring of running the instance and available RIs. The ability to dive into the granular detail of our report and find things such as the 2 a.m. peak that we saw in some of our instances have meant that we've been able to develop some clear rules on how we would expect our instances to behave. It means that we can now better monitor things in real time and therefore take action before it appears in our bill. This would not have been possible if we hadn't decided to invest in our own knowledge and leverage the power of the AWS billing data. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for that, Angela. So if we look at the story, I think to recap both of those, it's really around create visibility within your organization and set metrics that you're going to look at achieving in regards to cost optimization. So if it's RI coverage, if it's high use of elasticity, we'll send out these slides and then you can have the examples that were mentioned here today. But internally analyze those and determine what's right for you. Go down that path of, if you're going to look at either organization, a large, maybe a center of excellence where you do all of these activities, so right-sizing, increasing elasticity, looking at your billing model, potentially rematching storage. You can manage them holistically or individually. One of the things that you can do to take advantage of the AWS team is reach out to the account management team. So we're always keen to talk to customers and provide information in regards to what we think would be recommendations for your account in regards to, say, for example, reserved instances. Or we can help you with time with our solution architecture team to look at how do you re-architect and manage your workloads or your applications to better take advantage of elasticity. On the topic of elasticity, that was just an announcement this morning. AWS announced per second billing. So potentially looking at utilizing elasticity to take advantage of that new cost structure and how AWS resources are built. So there's lots of great steps. Reach out to the team, reach out to myself, and I'll get you in the right direction. We really appreciate everyone's time today. Thanks for giving us that opportunity to help go down that path of optimization. And again, thanks for Kat and Angela for joining on today's session and walking through your customer examples. I saw that Amy had some questions, but there wasn't a general consensus, so I'm hoping everything, all the questions have been answered by just great content today. But if there is anything as a follow-up, please feel free to reach out to the team, to your account manager, or email me, and I'm happy to help. Thanks, everybody, for attending today's session, and we'll hopefully talk to you soon. Cheers.